All right, I think we'll get started. We might have a few more people joining us as we come in, but welcome and thank you so much for joining us today for our online event, Maine's Environment in the 2025 Legislature. My name is Emmy Taberge, and I'm the Outreach Director at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. NRCM is the state's leading environmental advocacy organization. We harness the power of science, the law, and the voices of people like you to protect the nature of Maine. Before we get started today, we want to acknowledge that the work we do in Maine is on unceded Wabanaki territory. We recognize the Wabanaki nations who have stewarded this land for time immemorial. We work alongside the Wabanaki nations, including in support of the effort to achieve state recognition of inherent tribal sovereignty and to protect the land, air, water, and wildlife. NRCM is committed to actively using our voices, our resources, and our power to do so. Now for a few housekeeping items. This event is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel if you'd like to review anything after that we've covered today or to share with your friends. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the Q&A box you'll find on your menu at the bottom of the screen. We will try to save time at the end of the presentation for questions, but if we run out of time, we'll respond to your questions via email. We'll also be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation and we'll pull questions from there. Now, before we dive into our legislative priorities, I want to acknowledge that there's no doubt there are big challenges to tackle this year. From the growing climate impacts affecting our towns to the changing character of Maine's North Woods, we believe that the best way to face these challenges is by working together on a foundation of honest, open dialogue based on science and our shared love of Maine's environment. I want to start by sharing with you how our team is going to approach this year of significant challenges. First, we are focused on advancing progress. We have an opportunity in Maine to set an example for the rest of the nation by taking bold action on climate, expanding access to the outdoors, and adopting practical, common sense policies to protect our woods, waters, and wildlife. Together, we can show what's possible when people and policymakers come together to protect what we love. Second, as always, NRCM will be defending Maine's environment. We stand ready to stand firm against any attempts to claw back essential climate investments or undermine protections for clean air and water, including what we're already seeing at the federal level. We've faced challenges like this in the past, and we're ready to face them again. Here in Maine, we have a strong track record of coming together to protect the environment we hold dear for the health of our communities and for future generations. And finally, we look forward to embracing these challenges and opportunities together. The legislative session isn't just about laws, it's about people. We're committed to listening, learning, and expanding our statewide community so that we can speak up for what matters most to Maine people. We'll provide opportunities at local meetings and at the State House to bring supporters together, and we hope you'll join us. All right, let's get started. I'm joined today by our staff experts who will share our top priorities in this legislative session that will protect Maine's climate, wildlife, water, and outdoors. I'd now like to introduce Pete Dittesheim, NRCM Senior Director of Advocacy, to give an overview of the 2025 legislative session and why it's important for people like you to get involved.
Okay, next slide. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Again, I'm Pete Dittesheim. I'm the Advocacy Director, and I have been here for 28 years. So this will be my 29th time around the track at the State House. And the legislative session is already underway, and the halls are alive with activity, which has been kind of exciting to us. We're thrilled to be part of the process, and we're ready to make the most of this upcoming legislative session. Next slide. So we got our first view of the bill titles that were introduced last Friday. The deadline was actually January 10th, but we finally saw the list. 2,199 total bill titles introduced by individual legislators and also agencies. We've gone through that list and we've identified 275 bills that we're going to be paying attention to at some level. We'll probably testify on 70 to 100 of them. And any and all of you who may be interested in showing up at the State House and testifying on legislation that you care about, you'll be hearing from us, encouraging you to do so. Please, please do it. It's, the policy process is not a spectator sport. It's a contact sport, and we need you to contact your legislators in person and indirectly through emails and phone calls whenever possible to help affect the outcome. So a lot's going to happen between now and June 18th, which is statutory adjournment, the third Wednesday of June. and we're going to put as many wins on the board as we can out of these nearly 2,200 bills, which includes a lot of rollback bills that we will try to defeat. Next slide. So this will be a challenging session. The budget constraints are going to make it difficult to pass bills that cost money, but we will do the best we can. And the partisan margins are very close, closer than they have been in recent years. The House has a very thin margin, and the Senate is a closer margin. NRCM works to build bipartisan support on all of our legislation, and we've developed excellent relationships with many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, and we will always continue to do that. However, when things get close, things get more partisan, and that clearly is a backdrop that will make this session a little bit more challenging. Next slide. We do feel really good about the legislative leadership that's been elected in both the House and the Senate. We know these lawmakers well. We have good relationships with them. They're strong on the environment on the Democratic side. We do the best we can working with the Republican minority leaders as well. There's a couple new to leadership on that side. This is the first time in the Senate we have 3 women in leadership positions. Maddie Daughtry is the youngest Senate president ever in Maine. And many of these folks we have partnered with on key legislation in the past. Next slide. I have kept track of the number of women legislators over the years. This year there's 79, which is interesting and still strong. It was much lower when I started in 1996. So that's great. And the next slide shows that we have a lot of new legislators. We have term limits in the state of Maine, so each lawmaker can only serve 4 consecutive 2-year terms in each chamber. They can take a break and then run for the other office or the other chamber. But we have a lot of new legislators that we need to meet. Next slide. And we have a lot of leaders at the State House who are passionate, who we develop relationships with. We depend on them. They know their issues. We work well with them. Many of these are the individuals that we will work closest with. We already are working closely with them. And lawmakers are people too, just like the rest of us. So I encourage you to think of the Maine Legislature as just like your neighbors, as just like people that are in your community. It's a citizen legislature. There's no real staff that protect them from you. So reach out to them and get to know them. Many of them depend on the information that you know to help them do their jobs. And they work incredibly hard. And they have interesting stories. And all of our work is about relationships, developing relationships with these key people who are in positions of influence, who are seeking to serve the public sector and do the best for the state of Maine. Next slide. And while we're working to do the best we can in the upcoming legislative session here in Maine, we also are keeping a very watchful eye on what's happening in Washington, D.C. And I will share what I think many of us feel. The last 48 hours in particular have been alarming. The blanket freeze on spending and grants, the communication to all federal workers to choose an opt-out, a buyout, or which basically means resign for their position, and that their security of their position is potentially uncertain after September. These are attacks not just on policies and programs and spending, but actually on the individuals who are in critical roles throughout our government, implementing programs, using their expertise in a way that helps protect the public good and the environment. So we will be focusing very closely on how actions in DC may impact Maine's environment. We have a dedicated staff member who's not with us today. Anya Fetcher will have future webinars and other activities that will give you an opportunity to learn what we're doing to respond to what's happening in DC. But people are the first line of defense, including you, including our staff, including other organizations, first line of defense for Maine's environment, and we will do everything we can to stop rollbacks while we continue to work to achieve forward progress for Maine's environment here in the state. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Luke to introduce himself.
Great, thanks, Pete. Hi, everyone. My name is Luke Frankel, and I'm the Woods, Waters, and Wildlife Director at NRCM. I started back in October, and I'm excited to share with you all today some priority bills that we have this session that will deal with protecting natural resources in the North Woods, as well as some other general bills that deal with priorities in the Woods, Waters, and Wildlife Program. Next slide. So one of our legislative priorities this session overall in the program is funding the Lands for Maine's Future program. And this session, there will be several bills focused on funding LMF, and they haven't been printed yet, so we don't have LD numbers yet. But for those of you who don't know, LMF is one of Maine's most popular and successful land conservation programs. And one of the reasons why it's so successful is it has a one-to-one match requirement. So every dollar spent by the program needs to be matched by another dollar, which doubles the impact that it has. And LMF was last funded in 2021 through a $10 million per year budget allocation over 4 years. And so now that it's 2025, that funding is running out. And so it's critical that we fund this program so that it can continue conserving land in the future. And just some brief statistics, the program, since it was founded in 1987, has conserved more than 650,000 acres across all 16 counties in the state. And below that, in the slide, you'll see a breakdown of where these acres fall in terms of working forests and farmland that were conserved, as well as the number of sites for recreational water access, as well as working waterfronts that were conserved through the program. Next slide. And then to the topic of bills, we have one bill that we're working on this session that deals with protecting natural resources in the North Woods. And there's kind of two natural resources in particular that we're protecting. The first is older growth forests. And this conversation around older growth forests really came to prominence back in October when this report by Hagen et al. Came out, where they used LIDAR to map the location of this older growth forest in the unorganized territories in Maine. And so what this report did was it showed how much of this older growth forest we currently have and where it's located. So now the next step is, how can we do things to conserve this important resource that is so important for carbon sequestration as well as biodiversity? And this older growth forest once represented 70% of the forested landscape in Maine, and now it only represents 3%. And if no action is taken, the report has actually shown that half of this 3% will be gone in 35 years based on the rate that it's been cut. So the bill is specifically focused on various conservation actions to protect this resource. And this includes directing the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry to develop a statewide strategy, require that the department report on progress towards that strategy, as well as promoting various acquisition avenues to protect this resource. Next slide. The other aspect of this Northwoods natural resource bill is to protect remote undeveloped lakes in the unorganized territories. And the current framework that the Land Use Planning Commission, which is the body that governs the unorganized territory, uses to manage the 1,500 lakes in their jurisdiction was established in 1987 through the Maine Wildland Lake Assessment. And this assessment looked at all the lakes and categorized the resource value based on and determined whether these lakes are of state, regional, or of unknown significance. And it also established management classes for these lakes. So out of all the 1,500 lakes, 14% fall into this management class 1 or 6, which is the highest level of protection. And these lakes are remote, undeveloped, inaccessible. And so what this management class does is it prevents development from either a quarter mile or a half mile buffer around the lake. But one issue is there's 78% of lakes that have no management class associated with it. So what this legislation will do, the goal is to place all undeveloped, inaccessible lakes that are of statewide significance and are not currently protected within this management class 1 or 6 to provide protection. Next slide. And then finally, just to quickly discuss some clean water bills that we'll be working on this session. There's a bill that was already printed, and it was a department bill, LD 25, that's a wastewater bond. And this allocates $50 million for wastewater treatment facilities across the state to develop and infrastructure to help this issue of sludge that they have. And this sludge needs to go to landfills. And so this will reduce the need to expand those landfills, and it would also limit PFAS pollution associated with the expansion. And there's also another bill that we're working on to improve septic system designs to reduce nutrient pollution. Maine is one of the most septic reliant states in the country. And historically, septic systems have been designed to treat pathogens and not nutrients. And this bill simply directs the Department of Health and Human Services to change the disposal field design requirements to allow for more nutrient removal based on natural soil characteristics. And I'll gladly answer any questions about any of this at the end, but with that, I'll pass it over to Jack.
All right, thanks so much, Luke, and thanks everyone for being here today. We have dozens of bills that we're going to be working on in the Energy Committee this year, but I'm going to spend my time focused on one, which is a really exciting chance we have in Maine to accelerate our progress on clean energy here in the state. And this is really important this year, as Pete mentioned, and as everyone is aware of. We've seen a real turnaround in support for tackling climate change and developing clean energy resources at the federal level. So really important that we take what steps we can here in Maine. So brief background on this. Back in 2023, Governor Mills announced a goal to reach 100% clean energy, clean electricity by 2040. And for the past few years, the governor's energy office has been doing research and analysis to inform a legislative proposal to enact it. And this year, Senator Mark Lawrence has introduced a bill to codify this goal. Next slide, please. So why is this important? Well, first of all, clean energy is important because burning fossil fuels is the primary cause of climate change. And climate change is already impacting us here in Maine. It may be snowy today in much of Maine, but 2024 was the hottest year on record in Maine, and we're just over a year from some of the most devastating storm impacts that we've seen in the state, both inland, up in the Western Mountains, and along our coasts. Clean energy is also the backbone of Maine's climate action plan. In order to move away from fossil fuels that cause climate change, we need to switch the energy we use away from fossil fuels. So that means from moving towards electric vehicles and a more diverse transportation system. It means switching to electric heating, like high efficiency heat pumps. And having a cleaner electricity system over time actually is like a superpower for those electric appliances. As the grid gets cleaner over time, that electric vehicle, that electric heat pump, just gets cleaner and cleaner as the electricity it uses gets cleaner. Clean energy, maybe most importantly, saves money and boosts the economy. High energy prices that we pay here in Maine are primarily driven by our dependence on fossil fuels as a state and as a region, whether that's gasoline or diesel for cars, heating oil or propane for heating our homes, or the natural gas power plants that make up the most of the generation on the New England grid. So we spend billions of dollars sending it out of state for out of state energy resources and fuels every year. And we think that money could be much better spent investing in clean energy that's made right here in Maine. So because of the development of some of these clean energy technologies like wind and solar, the governor's office did an analysis called the 2040 Pathways Analysis. And what it showed was reaching 100% clean electricity by 2040 could lower average household energy costs by about $1,300 per year, as some of those more expensive fuels like gasoline, for example, are replaced by lower cost and more efficient things like electric vehicles. Maine's existing clean energy policies, Maine's renewable portfolio standard, has already resulted in $1 billion of investment, more than $20 million annually in benefits to Maine ratepayers, and more than 1,000 new clean energy jobs. And total, more than 15,000 people already work in the clean energy industry in Maine. So we're having some really good discussions with stakeholders, with the sponsor, the administration, about some of the details of this bill. And we're really excited to be working on a policy that is really going to boost our clean energy policies here in Maine. help address climate change and provide a boost to our economy. So I'll also be happy to answer your questions about this at the end, but I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Rebecca Schultz.
Hi, everyone. Jack alluded to this, but I will add and emphasize that a key part of achieving our climate and clean energy goals is reducing our dependence on electricity from the regional New England grid, which is 60% powered by natural gas. And because of the way that the New England market is designed, the natural gas actually has an even more outsized effect on price, such that the price we pay for New England electricity is set by the price of natural gas 80% of the time. And that's a huge price risk exposure for an essential service. And Maine homes and businesses have been feeling that exposure acutely through their electricity bills since 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine. So securing a homegrown supply of renewable energy is integral to both reducing fossil fuel use on the one hand, but also reducing and stabilizing energy costs on the other. And the net energy billing program, which includes rooftop solar as well as community scale projects, is part of the portfolio of programs we need to support the development of Maine-based clean energy. And that program is under fire. Next slide. The Net Energy Billing Program, or NEB as it's called, was expanded in 2019 to create opportunities for customers to subscribe to small-scale solar. To subscribe to small-scale solar installations. It had the intention of both giving customers more options to engage in clean energy opportunities and also to jumpstart the solar industry here in Maine. And that effort has been successful. There's in fact been a 19-fold increase in solar generation, significant growth in spite of the challenges that so many solar companies have faced in getting their projects connected to CMP inverse grids. There are now well over 110,000 participants across the state benefiting from clean, affordable energy through the program. These are Maine businesses, commercial industrial businesses, municipalities, nonprofits, school districts, as well as individual households. The legislature has taken incremental steps to wind the program down, but it's still under fire for costs. And the program does have costs, but actually the NEB costs are dwarfed by recent drivers of electricity costs, namely natural gas and storm cost recovery. I spoke to natural gas earlier, which added $60 a month to CMP household bills between 2021 and 2023. But responding to increasingly severe weather events has been the second largest factor driving up electricity bills. In fact, storm recovery cost CMP customers $220 million last year alone. That added roughly $10 a month to household bills, and that was just to cover 3 storms. So that's a huge impact. And of course, storm costs are on the rise with climate change. These costs are already rising year over year, and they're poised to continue to escalate. By contrast, the net energy billing program comprises roughly 4% of electricity bills, or $7. And these program costs actually don't convey the full picture because they fail to account for the benefits that these projects also bring. Benefits like reducing demand for fossil fuel supply and avoided strain on our transmission and distribution system, reducing pollution, among other benefits. There was an independent analysis done for the PUC in 2024 that found that the prior year program costs of $130 million were outweighed by $160 million in program benefits. So looking to the current legislative session, we've already seen 2 attempts to repeal the program in its entirety. There's some hearings next week for LD 32 and LD 357, but there will surely be more. These programs in particular would not only prevent people from being able to put solar on their roofs and export the extra energy that they can't consume during the high peak solar time of the day, but they would also upend thousands of operational projects, inspire a frenzy of lawsuits, and pull the rug out from underneath the local clean energy economy that we've been trying to foster here in Maine, setting us back in our transition to clean energy. So, given the complexity of this program and the layering of the amendments to it, we see our role at the State House as one of watchdog, engaging in the legislature to help make sure that the debate is fact-based and data-driven. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I'll turn it over to Josh Caldwell to speak about our priorities in the transportation sector. Thanks.
Whew. Thanks, Rebecca. This is reaffirming my appreciation for the amount of work that NRCM does every session. I'm Josh. I work with the climate team as well, and I've really been focused on clean transportation recently. And that's largely because it's one of my favorite topics. I think it really speaks to how responding to climate change can actually improve our existing systems and increase quality of life for all Mainers. Each and every one of us engages with our transportation system in some capacity every day. And that system right now is too expensive, too dangerous, and too polluting. But there are things we can do to make it better. Pictured here on the title slide is the Bangor Community Connector, which just received an award to add 2 new hybrid or electric buses in circulation alongside driver training. And here we see someone taking advantage of the attached bike rack, which I think is just a great example of how multimodal transportation can interact effectively. All right, we can jump into our next slide for our legislative priorities this session. We do have several bills in this arena that we are working on and tracking. I'll touch on some of those in a moment, but I want to direct our focus to our biggest priority, which is a bill to align our transportation investments with our state's climate action plan and cut climate pollution by increasing transportation options. This bill has not yet been printed, but we are excited that the bill is being sponsored by Senator Stacey Brenner, who is also a member of the Maine Climate Council and who we've worked with on quite a few issues before. So if you've heard me talk before, you probably know that transportation is the largest source of climate pollution in Maine, and by a really good margin. It accounts for about half of the pollution that Maine contributes each year. It takes a lot of energy to move people and goods from place to place. And right now, the primary way we do that in Maine is with cars and trucks, most of them with combustion engines. We know that we have to electrify those vehicles as one step, right? And we've been making great strides on that front. But to hit our climate goals, we also have to provide more options, such as public transportation and safe biking and walking infrastructure to get Mainers where they need to go and revitalize our downtowns and villages. And we actually have a goal in our climate action plan that is to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 20%, right? So reduce the amount of dependence that we have on our cars and trucks. This bill will direct our state transportation agencies to plan in alignment with our climate goals with distinct strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions year over year. We have a really great climate action plan, but we aren't making the progress that plan calls for in regards to transportation in particular. And Mainers are driving more now than ever. We have higher driving rates per capita than prior to the pandemic. This bill also establishes that the climate impact for any new proposed transportation projects must be modeled, and that projects that would increase greenhouse gas emissions are offset by investment in projects that reduce climate pollution by at least the same amount, such as bus rapid transit and active transportation. This way, we can better understand the impacts of new projects and ensure that we are not contributing to climate change as we improve our transportation system. As Maine grows and develops, it's more important than ever that that our state transportation planners are taking climate change into consideration when reviewing and approving transportation projects. If climate change is not part of transportation planning, our limited taxpayer funds will go to more expensive, more polluting projects that can increase traffic and make roads more dangerous. Investing in clean transportation options like more frequent and reliable transit and safer streets will help to improve safety, protect our health, and support local economic growth. It'll also help us to address the 40,000 Maine households that do not have reliable access to a vehicle, a number that will likely rise in the coming years as owning and operating a vehicle is getting more and more expensive. And now we're seeing that it's about $12,000 a year on average to own and operate a personal vehicle, over $1,000 a month. Let's head to the next slide, please. So there will be a few legislative opportunities this session for you to weigh in on bills to make our transportation system less polluting, less expensive, safer, more equitable, more accessible, and more efficient. I'm excited because I think we have a convergence of folks who are excited about improving our transportation system, and environmental advocates are really leading the way. The bill I just mentioned is a really big one, but there will also be a bill to restore Maine's electric vehicle rebate, improve Maine's public transit network, and increase transparency in transportation decision-making. I serve on the Public Transit Advisory Council, and we're really excited that people from every corner of the state are eager to see our public transit system improve for all, and especially for those who can't drive or can't afford to drive. So it's definitely time, it's past time to plan for a smarter, cleaner transportation future, and I'm really excited to do that alongside all of you. And with that, I'll pass it to Vanessa.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. I love clean transportation and walkable cities, so it'd be great to see more of those in Maine. My name's Vanessa Berry. I'm the Sustainable Maine Program Manager here at NRCM, which basically means I'm the resident trash talker. I love talking about trash recycling and the like. And there's been a lot of different conversations around sustainable materials management here in the state. As you might expect, for those who manage materials at the end of life, there's a lot of work involved in responding and reacting to all the different types of items that get thrown away every day. The policies that we work on have the potential to address these materials at the source and reduce the strain on our waste infrastructure to deal with all of that stuff. This grows increasingly important as we run out of landfill capacity and material types get a little bit more dangerous and hazardous to manage. Next slide, please, Kristen. So the 132nd Legislature has proposed over 30 bill titles that deal with issues related to waste, recycling, and management of discarded materials. These include some advancements to our organics and food scrap management, potential expansions and amendments to our product stewardship programs, and unfortunately, this also includes many proposed rollbacks that would undermine our state's progress on waste reduction and meeting our 50% recycling goal, which has been unmet for the last 30 years. So we need to get moving on that. So for example, there are 2 bills currently printed that aim to roll back or repeal the state's plastic bag ban. And 1 bill proposed that would further limit the types of plastic bags used in retail spaces. So to just kind of counter the repeal, potentially expanding that program. So we'll keep an eye on that. When the statewide bag ban passed in 2019, NRCM came together with Maine people, our communities, the Environmental Priorities Coalition, and Maine retailers to create a statewide program that addresses this problematic material and provides consistency for businesses who were previously trying to comply with the many different local ordinances that were in place. It's estimated that in the United States alone, consumers use about 100 billion plastic bags each year, or roughly 1 bag per person each day. This ban eliminates this waste at the source and prevents unwanted plastic bag litter in the environment. Maine has also made a lot of progress on a variety of other solid waste issues in the state, and there are many programs currently underway in our local and state departments to address plastic pollution, reduce the use of toxics in our products, and improve the recycling and recovery of our natural resources. NRCM is actively engaged in Maine's implementation of our Extended Producer Responsibility Program for packaging, affectionately referred to as EPR for packaging. And this aims to hold polluters accountable for their wasteful packaging and helps towns recycle more packaging material. So it addresses all of those things, whether it's toxics, labeling, and the volume of material entering our state. This is ongoing work that's happening behind the scenes to engage communities, material managers, and producers throughout the process of implementing to ensure that this program is a success and a good role model for other states who hope to create similar EPR policies. We're staying focused on implementing the first in the nation law. Maine was the first state to pass EPR for packaging in the country. But we're keeping a watchful eye on bills that have yet to be printed to prevent any efforts that might weaken the impacts of this program and other product stewardship programs here in the state. So whether it's a fight at the State House or a fight over the details in the stakeholder meetings that happen at the department level, we'll be ready and we'll keep you posted on those. So I'm happy to answer any questions at the end, but for now, I'll turn it over to Branya to talk about tribal sovereignty.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Hi, everybody. I'm Branya Lechtman. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Manager here at NRCM, and I'm going to talk a little bit right now about legislation to ensure the state of Maine recognizes the sovereignty of the Wabanaki Nations. So this has been a priority and significant coalition effort over the last few years. This work has been led by the Wabanaki Alliance, which was founded by the 4 Wabanaki tribes: the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians, the Micmac Nation, the Passamaquoddy Tribe, and the Penobscot Nation. NRCM is one of over 300 organizations and businesses part of the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition, a group that supports the Wabanaki inherent sovereignty and helps advance the work of the Wabanaki Alliance. So there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, and all 570 federally recognized tribes outside of Maine are recognized as sovereign. So What is tribal sovereignty? I know a lot of you know, but just to reiterate, tribal sovereignty is the right of tribes to govern themselves. This includes the inherent right to sustain their traditional cultural values and practices, establish their own form of government, determine citizenship requirements, enact legislation, and more. So next slide, please. The 1980 Maine Indian Lands Claims Settlement Act established a unique and troubling relationship between the Wabanaki nations and the state. This act allowed the Wabanaki nations to be treated more as municipalities rather than sovereign nations, therefore limiting their ability to regulate or oversee their lands and community independently from the state. This also means they have limited access to federal funding and programs that are available to all 570 other federally recognized tribes in the United States. They have been prevented from accessing at least 151 federal laws passed since 1980 that are beneficial to Indian nations. This has led the Wabanaki tribes in the state of Maine to miss out on really important opportunities in economic development, healthcare, environmental protections, disaster response, and more. An example of the implications of this is highlighted in a Harvard Kennedy School report that found the average per capita income of the Wabanaki nations has risen a mere 9% since 1989, relative to a rise of 61% for members of all other federally recognized tribes outside of the U.S., outside of Maine. In 2019, a task force was established by the Maine Legislature to recommend changes to the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act to improve relationships between the Wabanaki nations and the state of Maine. This task force developed a report with 22 recommendations for how to ensure the sovereignty of the Wabanaki nations is recognized by the state of Maine, from fish and game provisions to criminal jurisdiction. Since then, there's been a big legislative push to ensure these recommendations become law. Last year, we celebrated a win with some of the recommendations becoming law. This included the strengthening of tribal courts and restoration of criminal jurisdiction, as well as the strengthening of the Penobscot Nation's ability to ensure they have clean drinking water. There was wide public support with more than 620 pieces of supportive testimony submitted on this legislation, which is great. So this was a really, really exciting step, but the majority of the recommendations still remain. This includes recommendations related to hunting and fishing rights, as well as land use and natural resource management. With the rapidly growing momentum for tribal sovereignty and strong leadership from the Wabanaki Alliance, we are really eager to ensure that sovereignty for the Wabanaki nations is fully recognized by the state of Maine this legislative session, and the remaining recommendations become law. NRCM and the Wabanaki nations in Maine are often woven together in common cause as we seek to nurture healthy environments and communities. The Wabanaki people have lived here far longer than we have, and we trust their knowledge of the land and its needs. So tribal sovereignty is really critical to achieving our mission here at NRCM of protecting the nature of Maine. For more information, including a helpful explainer of those 22 recommendations, and also information about how you can get involved this legislative session and beyond, you can check out the Wabanaki Alliance website to see how you can contribute to their work. So thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it back to Emmy.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for sharing all of those updates on our priority bills. We really do have a lot of exciting work ahead of us and are so glad to have so many supporters on this webinar with us today. We will have time for some questions, so feel free to put some of your questions in the Q&A box. And if we don't get to your specific question, we can follow up with you via email. While you're thinking of questions and adding them, I wanted to make sure to share some ways that you can stay engaged with us during this legislative session to take action. The first and most impactful is to join us in Augusta on Tuesday, April 8th for our annual State House Action Day. At this event, you'll have a chance to speak directly with your legislators in the halls of the State House and on the issues that you care about. New this year, we're adding Take Action Tuesdays to our slate of events. Starting on Tuesday, February 18th, we'll be offering a weekly opportunity for you to join us in Augusta to talk with your legislators at the State House about active environmental legislation. You can also join us for monthly climate action calls, which are hosted the first Thursday of every month. On next week's calls, we'll cover the year ahead for climate action at the federal and state levels, and there'll be lots of time for more discussion there. You can find the registration information for these opportunities and others on NRCM's website on our events page, and we'll also drop the registration links into the chat for these now. If you haven't already, make sure that you're signed up to receive NRCM's action alerts, which is a way that we can send you emails with opportunities to attend public hearings, submit testimony, call and email your legislators, or sign petitions on active bills. This is a way that we can really inform you about the most important opportunities to take action throughout the session. And last, make sure you use our website as a resource. We have a ton of information on our website, including a bill tracking page that shows the status of environmental bills that we are tracking. And we have a take action toolkit that shares ways that you can draft and submit testimony and lots of other ways that you can take action this session. So those resources will be put into the chat, and we can also follow up with you via email. All right, I think we are ready for some questions. And Pete, I'm gonna ask you this first question. Can you explain the process of when bills get an LD number and how folks can find these bills and track their progress?
Sure. So every bill title gets an LR number, a legislative reference number, and those are just an internal number, and they're not useful for any of the legislative work. The bill doesn't actually exist until the revisor's office finalizes what the language is with the sponsor. The sponsor organizes co-sponsors to join it, and then it's printed and it goes to the House and Senate, and it's referenced to and sent to a committee. And so the committee of jurisdiction will be the committee that has jurisdiction over the agency that would be implementing that legislation if it passes. So there's the Environment Natural Resources Committee, the Agriculture Conservation Forestry Committee, Transportation Committee, the Energy Utilities Technology Committee. Those are the committees that we spend most of our time working at. And each of those committees will get 50 to 150 bills referenced. Every one of those bills will get a public hearing, every bill that's printed. As I mentioned earlier, every one of those that's a priority for us or for you, you have an opportunity to come and testify either for or against, or neither for nor against. So it's a very open process. The best way to keep track of these bills that we think are priority bills, is to go to the legislative tracking page that Emmy just mentioned on our website. And we put every bill there. We link to our testimony. We give information about when the upcoming hearing or work session is. We try to keep it up to date with any votes that have happened, so that you can go there and get a, and it's also connected there by Kristen in the chat. That's the best place to go. You can also go to the Maine Legislature website, and you can search for bills based on their subject or the bill number or the sponsor. It's a little bit more complicated process to do so, but you can also do that.
Great, thanks, Pete. All right, this next question is for our climate team. People are concerned about the risk to current clean energy and energy efficiency incentives that we have at the state and federal level, and including for people who are already thinking about projects. Can you just give a sense of how at risk you think these current incentive programs are?
Yeah, well, I think up until yesterday, I would have thought that there was a pretty broad spectrum of risk where, folks that had made investments, for example, in 2024, expecting to file for tax credits, by April 15th would have been, extremely safe. I don't think we know. I think what we are seeing from the Trump administration is a pretty extreme disregard for any kind of safe harbor for investments. I think we've seen just, again, mostly not in the climate and clean energy space, but I saw articles about Bangor Housing's federal accounts being frozen and them not being able to access funds. That kind of thing has never happened before. So it's really hard to say. I think us, like many others, are trying to understand what this means for a lot of specific things. There's everything from individual tax credits to grant funding that goes through state agencies to contract commitments with private companies. Just as an example, there's over the past few years, there's been more than $200 million that have gone to mostly farms across Maine to install things like solar on their barns to reduce energy costs. That's funding from the Inflation Reduction Act through the USDA. And we have no idea what will happen to those. They're clearly implicated in a bunch of the early executive orders. So I'm afraid I can't give any kind of comforting words. What is happening from the federal administration right now is very, very alarming. I guess the only comforting thing is I can say is that it's probably illegal. And we know that a court has stepped in already. But if you have any kinds of concerns about this, I would recommend that you call your elected representatives, I think in particular, Senator Collins, and if you live in the 2nd Congressional District, Representative Golden, and express to them how concerned you are and that you'd like them to do something about it.
Thanks, Jack. This next question is for Luke. Luke, someone is wondering if the Land for Maine's Future bill is in the governor's budget.
Yeah, great question. So I believe there is no reference in the current budget that's been released, no reference to LMF within it, but the governor is planning, and it hasn't been released yet, but to release a bond package. And so it's possible that LMF, there's already been bonds submitted through a bond bill that's been submitted through the legislature. It hasn't been printed yet, so it doesn't have an LD number, but it's possible that an LMF bond will be included in the governor's package of bonds, but we're still kind of waiting to see for when that gets released, whether that will be the case.
Thanks, Luke. This one is for Vanessa. With food waste being one of the biggest contributors to climate change, are there any legislative actions that you think Maine should prioritize to reduce food waste?
Yes, and there are a couple of bills that they don't have LDs yet. They're still in the LR stage that aim to address food waste in the state of Maine. So one of them is a repeat from last year, which actually went through and passed, but then died in appropriations. It wasn't given adequate funding. So we're revisiting that issue again this year. It was addressed in the materials management task force as a priority for materials that are kind of causing, they're exacerbating climate change. It's creating it's a large contribution of methane emissions into the state and deserves priority. So part of the strategy is to require high volume producers of food waste. So large volume businesses that are generating a lot of food waste that ultimately gets disposed of, and trying to reroute that food waste through other alternative channels. So making sure that it goes through food rescue organizations, it's getting donated if it's edible, for inedible food, if it's going to, farm applications, so being fed to animals, or compost and anaerobic digestion strategies over landfilling. So that's a proposed bill that we will support this legislative session. There's another one as well. And I know Suzanne Lee was on this call. She's working on food waste issues at the UMaine Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions. She is an expert on food waste stuff, and we collaborate with her a lot. So yeah, we'll be keeping folks posted on opportunities to weigh in on that issue, but hopefully we'll see some movement in the food waste space, both at the state level and in the local municipal level. So we'll keep you posted.
Thanks, Vanessa. This one's back over to the climate team. People are curious about the outlook for floating wind turbines off of the coast of Maine.
Sure, great question. So I think the couple really important points on offshore wind as it relates to this administration. One is that offshore wind is still really important for Maine and New England to reach our climate and clean energy goals. The wind resource in the Gulf of Maine particularly, but in the Northeast generally, is really strong. And that means that every turbine generates a ton of electricity a ton of the time. And without having giant windswept Great Plains or vast sunny deserts in our region, that is a resource that's really important if we want to move away from fossil fuels for transportation, for heating, for power generation, all of that sort of stuff. It remains true that it's also an enormous economic development opportunity for Maine, consistent with our maritime and shipbuilding heritage here in the state. Building offshore wind turbines will create an entire new industry and employ thousands of people around the state, and could be a global center for floating offshore wind. So the fact that it's become, put in the crosshairs of this administration as somehow being undesirable is perplexing. If you want to see energy independence and economic growth, you should want offshore wind. That being said, most of the projects that are currently under construction in southern New England got their leases and procurements, sort of contracts with states back in the mid 2010s, 2014, 2016, that time, and they're just being built now. So these are really, really mega projects. These are multi-billion-dollar projects. They're complex. They require a lot of planning and permitting and all of these kinds of things. So it's going to take a really long time for these to get built. And 2040, the date by which we want to see 100% clean electricity, and when our offshore wind targets are in place, are still 15 years away. And this administration is going to be in there for 4 years. So it's not, none of what's happening at the federal level is good news for offshore wind. And certainly more broadly, it's not good news for climate, for clean energy, and for the adoption of these technologies, which we know can really benefit people, reduce pollution, improve health, save consumers money. But on the offshore wind side, it's not the it's not a fatal blow. It is going to cause some delays, and I think in the meantime, there's some things that we really can work on. One is in particular is making sure that the research array moves forward. For those folks who aren't tracking that, that's the first multi-turbine floating project that will be built on the East Coast, and we'll be using the University of Maine's technology, the technology developed at UMaine Orono at the center there. So yeah, still a lot that we can do. It's not good news, but it's not the end of the road.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Just wanted to note also that some of the questions are being answered in the chat and also in the Q&A box. So definitely make sure to check out those two parts if you are waiting for a question to be answered. I think let's go with, let's see, this one's for you, Luke, also. People are reacting to 3% of the older growth forest is a really alarming statistic. And so what steps do you think there are that the state could take to protect and restore older growth forests moving forward?
Yeah, so it's definitely alarming, and it's definitely something we didn't know how many of this older growth forest, and it's not technically old growth. We have very little of actual uncut forest. So this is just forest that has grown in and is aged to a point where it's very, very similar to older growth forests. And so we recently found out those numbers, so we're kind of working to develop those strategies now. And I would say a couple strategies that are intriguing is, again, a lot of it is on private property. So conservate, and they're also scattered throughout the state. So direct conservation by purchasing land is certainly one strategy, but it's difficult because they're scattered, and oftentimes they're really small slivers of this older growth forest. So another strategy is through carbon markets. So currently making sure that the landowners can get paid for leaving the trees uncut and get paid to a comparable amount for doing that compared to what the value they would get by cutting that timber down. So that's definitely a promising strategy, and it's definitely something that organizations such as the New England Forestry Foundation just received a grant to kind of, I believe it was $4.3 million to kind of proceed with strategies to compensate landowners for keeping these trees. So that strategies like that with combination with carbon markets is kind of a strategy that's being pursued that needs to be worked out along with traditional land conservation.
All right, thanks, Luke. All right, this question is for our climate team again. Can you talk a little bit more about the use of railways, such as the idea of passenger rail between our cities, or use of rail for other things?
Yeah, I was hoping we'd get a transportation question. This is great. Rail is going to be an important part of our transportation, our multimodal transportation future, along with a whole bunch of other options. I think what's really important to note is that for so long, we've been developing and planning our transportation infrastructure around cars and trucks. And that's become the primary way in which people are moving themselves and goods around the state. And we need to have a more diverse multimodal system that intersects and is a network that allows people to get from place to place. In some places, that's going to look more like fixed bus or train service that operates at a regularity that commuters can depend upon buses and trains to get to where they need to go. In more rural, less dense areas, that might look like on-demand transit. So, calling for rides and having a transit van circulate through a rural community to bring people to essential services in downtowns. In some places, that might look like improving downtown infrastructure such that walking, biking, and rolling are the preferred modes of getting around. And I think that the really important key is ensuring that all of these modes are interconnected to each other. So there's a big conversation around last mile, right? When you get off a bus stop or a train stop, do you have the opportunity to get to an essential service or a downtown community, an economic center, with a mode that is not a personal vehicle? So trains are definitely a big part of the multimodal future. We'll assess all of the proposals that come forward on a project by project basis to see what makes the most sense for a given community. But we really want to ensure that any proposal is not moving forward that would increase greenhouse gases, and that any improvements we make to our transportation systems are ones that are reducing our climate impact. So trains are a part of it for sure. Back to you, Emmy.
All right, thanks, Josh. All right, well, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who joined us today. As you know, NRCM is a membership organization, and our work is powered by member support. Our members really are at the heart of everything we do, and we're so grateful to have you as a part of our community. If you're not already a member, we hope that you'll join us today, and you can find that information on our website. If you didn't get your question answered, we will definitely be sure to follow up via email, and you'll also be receiving an email with resources, the recording, and the slides, hopefully tomorrow. So thanks again, everyone, so much for being here, and we look forward to working with you during this legislative session.